Palos Verdes in the news, and that could only mean one man, Petros Papadakis. I actually thought as soon as I saw the news and I was like, okay, well, where did this LA accident happen? And as I saw everybody moving, kind of zooming in with their maps and everything else on television, I thought to myself, there's only one man I know who lives in Palos Verdes. That's Petros Papadakis. Did your phone blow up with people wanting to know if you were okay? If you had seen Tiger drive off the road?
Yeah, it was wild because I was up really early in the morning working, and after I drove my kids to school, I went back to sleep, as I am apt to do as a European and a sedentary man. And I woke up around noon, and I had like 400 texts.
Yeah.
From everybody and their mom, from every fireman I know in the area, every police officer I know in the area, every dad I know, all my high school friends. I mean, and then I looked up in the sky and there were helicopters over my house and the whole area, like 20 helicopters, which I have never seen. And so I got my stuff on and drove over to where the crash was, because it's really like a mile and a half from my house. And a mile from my high school. If you saw the aerial shots, that football field is my high school football field, Peninsula High School. Colin Cowherd said Palos Verdes is almost a peninsula yesterday on the air, and I just want to correct that and say it is a peninsula. In fact, it's called the Palos Verdes Peninsula, and the high school that I went to that is about a mile from where Tiger crashed is called Peninsula High School. So, I mean, calling the big deal, so we might have to change it to almost peninsula. But it's a very interesting thing, Clay, for us locals, because that is a very treacherous area to drive, as people have started to talk about. They started to kind of later in the evening yesterday. And people that know the area just know that that's if you've ever been to Los Angeles, south of the city, there's a hill. And that hill is called the Palos Verdes Peninsula. There's actually no town on it called Palos Verdes. There's Palos Verdes Estates. There's Rolling Hills Estates. There is the private city, Rolling Hills, where Steve Sarkeesian and Pete Carroll used to live. And there is Rancho Palos Verdes, which is the town I grew up in. I live now in Palos Verdes Estates. Tiger crashed on the border between Rancho Palos Verdes and Rolling Hills Estates, which is why you hear it characterized as one or the other over and over, because he crashed right on the border. And it's a hill. At the very top of the hill is where the high school is, and Tiger was going down the hill, and there's an emergency gravel lane over to the right because cars lose control all the time on that hill.
What causes that? I'm not an expert on driving by any stretch of the imagination, but what causes cars to lose control? Just the steepness of the hill? Is it the turns? Like what causes issues there?
I think what happens is you gather speed at a high rate, and then there's a turn and a stoplight. And if you're not from the area, it catches people off guard, especially if you look down at your phone or something like that. And he was late. What would happen all the time with us in our high school, especially in my high school, was 70% Asian, and a lot of kids had those crazy Hondas with the Momo wood and the exhaust and all that. And, we wouldn't have that problem in the morning because everybody's going up the hills toward the high school on top of the hill early in the morning. But at lunchtime and after school, you would have crashes all the time from people driving back down the hill, and fatal crashes right there in that area. There's a reason there's an emergency fire lane over to the right. I've gotten texts all the last couple days from people saying my family friend died there in 1984 on that road. So I don't know what was in Tiger's system. Obviously, he has a history of that kind of stuff, but I wouldn't be surprised if he just crashed because he did not know the area, he was late, and he was going too fast in a very unfortunate spot.
So for people out there, like I've been around this area, I think the Terranea Resort, would that be in close proximity to all of this as well?
Okay, well, that's where he was staying. Okay?
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
Okay, so that's on the backside of the hill, basically.
Yeah.
The only thing you stare at when you look out from the Terranea is the ocean and the Catalina Island, the northern part. So Terranea is where they used to, for your older listeners, they used to shoot the Lloyd Bridges show Sea Hunt there.
Yeah. Yep.
And then it was a marine land, like a SeaWorld type of place when I was a kid. And now it's a luxury hotel. Tiger was staying there. He took a terrible route. He was headed to Rolling Hills Country Club. And he took a route going over the top of the hill, which he didn't have to. Basically, all he had to do was go around the south side of the hill through San Pedro. But they probably would freak out if they saw Tiger Woods driving down Western Avenue in San Pedro. So he went over the top of the hill. Whatever reason he was on there, I think I understand he was late for a TV shoot, and he was staying at the Terranea and got out of there late. So it's about a 15-minute drive from where he crashed to Terranea. But Terranea is not close to anything, as you know, because it's in the middle of the biggest land movement area in the world. So there's not a lot of houses around there, and there would be because it's some of the most beautiful property in the world.
Oh, I mean, the resort. If people are looking for things on their bucket list, Terranea Resort is one of the most extraordinary resorts in the country. I mean, I don't think that's hyperbole.
Oh, terrible.
It's a
No,
fantastic
not
place.
true. Totally untrue. Like, people were saying, like, do you think Tiger was drunk? And I was like, it's impossible to get drunk at Terranea because the service is so bad you can't get enough liquor in you. And this was the complaint about Marineland. It's really a complaint about this area, which is a very isolated, very strange, very beautiful but odd
You
area.
wouldn't think that you were as close to one of the biggest cities in the world if you were in this area, right? That's a good way to describe it, which is one reason it's sort of popular is because people want an escape from the big city life.
A couple people pointed out a few things that might make that point for you. One, it is peacock mating season, and he might have swerved away from one of those, although not likely on Hawthorne. It's coyote mating season, and that's also likely that he might have swerved away from one of those. And some people asked an appropriate question. It's also maybe likely that his car could have rolled right into somebody on a horse in that area. So yes, it is. It's a very kind of strange, tucked away area, and there's no cell service. Everything's kind of backwards up here in a weird way. And the fact that it's now got every news van internationally in the world parked on it, and every helicopter above my house is a little surreal.
We're talking to Petros Papadakis, AM 570 LA Sports. You can hear him. For many people out there, given the fact that it was just a little bit over a year ago that Kobe Bryant's helicopter crashed, even though Tiger Woods is going to be okay, this was a moment to evoke those feelings that happened over a year ago. Is that the primary reaction that you heard among Southern California sports fans? Did you hear a lot of those connections being made?
We talked about it because it feels, it felt that way. I mean, obviously that was north of here in the Ventura County area, Calabasas area, which is a hilly, beautiful area, and those are the hills kind of above Malibu, which is the exact opposite side of the Santa Monica Bay from here. So, it all seems like a small area if you're really far away, but it kind of takes a while to get there. But I remember very sad, the day after Kobe's accident, we had to go and do Justin Turner's golf tournament, which was set in stone, and there was no going back, and it was all promotional. And we had to go and interview Clayton Kershaw and Justin Turner and Albert Pujols and all these guys at Sherwood Country Club, which is very close to the crash site.
Yeah.
So, and I drove right by the next day just because it was on the way. Like, I didn't go out of my way, but it was the same scene. 20 helicopters in the air, every news van in the world parked in an affluent community that is kind of a hilly area. Although where Kobe crashed is a little bit more remote. But yeah, it felt very similar, but, there you're talking about multiple people tragically dying, and Tiger's going to have a long road back to being comfortable again, I think, but he's certainly going to live.
We're talking to Petros Papadakis, AM 570 LA Sports. You had Tiger Woods on your radio show a few years ago. at his
Yes, to come to Jesus with Petros and money.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because Tiger is a Southern California kid, I think, by and large, for most of his life. And what's interesting about that conversation that you had with him was there was a certain pivot towards being a dad as opposed to being one of the best golfers in the world. And I feel like we saw that in December with him being out on the course with his son. And I think you've got 2 young kids. I've got 3 relatively young kids. For many of us, I think that transition from being, sort of the focal point to now being responsible for other people is a major life path. It feels like in many ways that was a tremendous moment for Tiger as well. And so I think a lot of people thought about him as a dad almost as much or more than they did of him as a golfer, because the last time we saw him on a golf course was with his son.
Yeah, growing up where I grew up and playing at USC, I got around a lot of people who grew up to be billionaires or Hall of Famers, and it's odd. I knew Tiger Woods in college a little bit because our kicker, his cousin, Byron Bell, was the guy, the bagman for Tiger Woods, the guy that went down with all of his women and all that stuff. And he was the caddy briefly after Fluff quit, if you remember. Byron Bell. Well, our kicker was David Bell, and he was Tiger Woods' best friend. Byron was his cousin. So we were around him, and he wasn't likable. He was a big nerd and kind of a creep when I knew him when I was a kid. So all those years later, after all of his struggles and all the stupid sports talk takes in the world about him when I'm forced to answer questions about golf, we interviewed him for like a half hour, and it was talk about surreal because he burned a hole through me. I mean, he looked dead into my eyes and Matt's eyes and answered the questions honestly and really was candid. And people still talk about that interview because it was before he won the Masters, and we joke around and say, we saved him,
Yeah.
He changed after he talked to us, but he was very candid about his life. And then the weirdest part about the interview was that he didn't leave. There's like 12 handlers there, half with him, half with the Genesis, and he didn't leave. He wanted to talk to me about USC and maybe some illicit things at USC over the years when I was younger. And we had an in-depth conversation, and he talked to my radio partner about golf courses in the Orange County area where he lives and where Tiger grew up, North Orange County. And it was weird, man. He wouldn't leave. It's like he wanted to connect with us for some weird reason. And that's the last time I saw him. But we always talk about that interview. And I changed, like that moment, obviously, I changed the way I felt about him just because he was so giving and so gracious and so forthcoming with everything. So, yeah, that happened, and it was an odd moment. And I thought about him and his kids and his wife, ex-wife, and his girlfriend and all that. Before I thought about, well, is he going to be able to beat Jack Nicklaus's record? Or I don't.
Yeah.
I felt horrible just because we had, obviously you don't want to see anybody hurt like that or anyway, but we had that really meaningful, it felt like interaction that changed the way we approached him for sure.
Did we, and I don't mean you and me specifically, but we as media in general, one of the things that I think is interesting about Tiger Woods is I was kind of watching some of the documentary that's up on HBO, and there's a documentary up about Britney Spears too, and they're really kind of the same era, even though I think they're separated by 7 or 8 years of age. And what you saw in those documentaries was sort of a voracious hunger to cover every single aspect of their lives such that there was indeed no privacy at all associated with them. Can you remember anybody ever being covered, not to his athletic exploits, but to the degree his private life was covered ever in the history of sports? Because I can't. And it's just interesting to think about Tiger Woods not only as being a transcendent golfer, but as also being this luminescent celebrity star that was treated, I think, quite a bit differently than anybody else in the world of sports.
Well, I mean, to get that deep, I think we always end up prisoners of the moment with this is the most covered person in the world. And let's be honest, he's one of the most recognizable people on earth.
Yep.
which is why there's helicopters flying all over the place like somebody died. Nobody died. So I think there's part of that. But then, you think about Charles Lindbergh and the Lindbergh baby 100 years ago, and think about what that story was. You think about the British press, all the way back.
I talked about it with Harry and Meghan, and the reason they've moved to California is to try to escape the British press. There's no doubt.
Well, I knew her in college. Ugh.
Meghan, you did?
Well, she married a guy that my wife and her friends were friends with. So she was at parties and stuff when
how has this never come up before? We got to bring this up next week.
Well, she had the same reputation with that guy that she did with the prince, believe it or not. Just on a smaller microcosm. A real climber, so to speak.
Petros Papadakis, we appreciate the time. Good luck avoiding all of the helicopters surrounding your house. We will talk to you next week. I appreciate it, my man.
I mean, you're not going to get that kind of inside Palos Verdes Peninsula information anywhere else, Clay.
No, that's why I said we got to make sure we got Petros on today, and we didn't even do the Bachelor Report, which we'll catch up on next week, too. There's too much data here.